Two-Way Tonight, brought to you by Diet Coke and the Bonson Group. Two great tastes that go great together. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining and ending your week here on the Two-Way platform. This is Two-Way Tonight. Fantastic guests this evening, Mercedes Schlapp and Brian Wolf. They've both been here before. They're both excellent. And we're going to run through the day's news and then take your questions. Because if you're watching here on the Two-Way platform, you have a wonderful opportunity to ask questions, to be part of the discussion. My day was very eventful, and it was another day with people saying to me, don't put so and so on again. I don't agree with them. I don't like listening to them because I don't agree with them. Those of you who understand peace, love, and understanding and the whole premise of the conversations we have here know that I'd prefer those people to thank me for bringing them alternative points of view. But anyway, lots to talk about. No, I don't think any huge news stories, but some significant developments on some of our narratives that we've been talking about quite a bit. A lot of Doge, a little bit of tariffs, a little bit of Ukraine. I think those are the main things we're going to talk about. And probably the thing that's getting the most attention is a New York Times story that, with deep reporting, chronicles a narrative storyline. Excuse me, don't drink Diet Coke right before air. That's a pro tip. About tension. We've told you on this platform, and you've seen it other places, tension between cabinet secretaries and Elon Musk over the way things are being cut. And as I think I said this morning, that what caused President Trump to yesterday, in a hastily called cabinet meeting, announced Wednesday night, held Thursday, not every cabinet member could make it there because they were doing other things, was both a pincer move, complaints from Republicans on Capitol Hill. I'm getting hounded. I'm speaking now as a member of Congress by my universities, my research institutes, my hospitals, my major employers, because these cuts are being done too precipitously. And from cabinet secretaries who said, we're confirmed, we have people coming in. This is our department. We don't work for Elon Musk. We didn't sign up to work for Elon Musk. That led the president in a cabinet meeting yesterday to say, Musk now can make recommendations, but he can't just come in and fire your employees. And I believe multiple times, check the video, I've said Marco Rubio first among equals in the cabinet who are really annoyed by this. The New York Times, to their credit, got the details of that in the cabinet meeting yesterday. If you're fortunate enough to be able to afford a subscription to the New York Times, please read it. They chronicle basically a fight in front of President Trump between Musk and Rubio, where Rubio criticizes Musk for being too, chainsaw-y in his firings, including at the USAID, and Musk saying, making some snide remark allegedly about Rubio just being good on TV. So the other cabinet secretary, according to the Times, who in that meeting fought with Musk was Sean Duffy. Why is this significant besides the drama of people fighting in the cabinet room, which is different than in the Peter Sellers movie where they fight in the war room, is because how Musk conducts himself will really matter. And I've not been one who said that Trump-Musk divorce was right around the corner, as some have forecast. But it's an interesting question if Musk will stay with wings clipped, because this story makes clear his wings was clipped. The Times describes the president as sitting back and watching the extended contretemps between the Secretary of State and his Doge commander. And Donald Trump kind of likes stuff like that. He loves drama. He loves gossip. He loves interpersonal tensions. But he also, seems to have sided with Rubio and the other cabinet members. So put up number 3, just so we can see this New York Times headline. Interesting, in the digital age, what happens, right, is a story runs inside the explosive meeting where Trump officials clashed with Elon Musk. There you go. In the digital age, a story like that runs, and then the comms people get together with the principals and say, we need to tamp down this story because we need to not have this be the story and other news organizations pick it up. So in this story, in the revised version, are a bunch of quotes from State Department spokesperson and White House spokesperson and Treasury Transportation Department, and all saying it was a very productive meeting, not really addressing whether the fight happened. So here's the president, number 4, please, Sam. Here's the president denying that there was any sort of clash between Elon Musk and the gentleman from Florida. Roll 4, please.
clashes potentially between Secretary Rubio and Secretary.
No clash. I was there. You're just a troublemaker. And you're not supposed to be asking that question because we're talking about the World Cup. Elon gets along great with Marco, and they're both doing a fantastic job. There is no clash.
Mr. President, bottom line.
Who are you with? Who are you with?
NBC.
Oh, no wonder. That's enough. NBC.
Who has more authority, Elon Musk or the cabinet secretary?
Any other questions about the World Cup?
Eek. So that way of handling it is a way to handle it, I suppose. But it's going to be interesting to see now how Musk operates, right? And the cabinet secretaries have established that they run the department. So that is something to watch. Now, this is not necessarily Doge related, but it does have to do with cutting spending and cutting spending in a way that achieves a major goal. Put up, please, number 9. This got a lot of attention today, too, in my inbox. I got a lot of incoming on this. We talked about the president cutting money to universities. Columbia University, according to the 3 announcements from different parts of the federal government, losing $400 million in federal funding. I don't know what the annual budget of Columbia is. I don't know how big their endowment is, but I know 400 million is a lot of money for any school, except maybe Harvard. 400 million is a lot of money. So one of the great or institutions in America right now that is under full freak-out mode over the Trump 2.0 is universities. Great quote in the New York Times today in a story about the Trump administration intimidating people into silence from the president of Wesleyan in Connecticut, saying, he shouldn't be giving so much credit to standing up for Trump. But I can't remember the quote. I meant to bring it, but I forgot. In any event, this is a big deal because they're going to war with the universities. Anyway, now on Ukraine, the president next week, there's negotiations between the U.S. and Ukraine back in Saudi. The Saudis again front and center in the negotiations. And today, in an earlier Oval Office event, the president talked about Ukraine, and then he called on his national security advisor to also comment. So let's listen to both of those. They're interesting. Number 1 and then number 2, Sam.
Make it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. They don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early. And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now. And I put a statement in, a very strong statement. Can't do that. Can't do that.
Mr. President,
we're trying to help them, and Ukraine has to get on the ball and get a job done.
Okay, and then number 2, please.
The president has been crystal clear, and he's been clear to all sides. The fighting has to stop. Both sides need to get to the table. We had a good engagement. Both leaders have said only President Trump could do so, and only he has been able to do so. We had an initial engagement with the Russians. The Ukrainians had a great opportunity to bind our economies together through that mineral deal. Unfortunately, that didn't go so well, but we think we're going to get things back on track. Secretary Rubio, myself and the Ukrainian delegation will be meeting in Saudi Arabia next week to get these talks back on track, get a ceasefire in place, and drive peace home under President Trump's leadership.
Under President Trump's leadership. So on the Russia side, there are now reports that are seemingly in contradiction. One is that the administration, the U.S. administration, is looking for ways to cut the current tariffs, current sanctions on Russia in order to provide a carrot to get them to agree to a deal. And then there's also reports that they're looking at new sanctions or threats of new sanctions in order to pressure Russia. That would be more of a stick. So we'll have to see where the talks go next week. But I continue to believe that Donald Trump does not have a linear plan, but he's determined to get Russia and Ukraine to the negotiating table. And again, on the margins, there's some lack of certainty, but we all know what the deal is going to look like. Okay. We all know what it's going to look like, and the president's trying to get it there. All right. On the issue of the economy and tariffs, talked to a lot of business people today and heard from a lot, and they all were saying the same thing, that and just to be clear, these are not all like Fortune 500 companies. I talked to a small business owner who has a lot of clients who are also small business owners, and they're all saying the same thing. Whether it comes down to purchasing new equipment like a new dishwasher for a restaurant, or making billion-dollar investments, the tariff uncertainty, not the tariffs themselves right now, but the tariff uncertainty is really weighing on business, and it's causing all sorts of dysfunction and concern that there'll be an economic slowdown because of the uncertainty, because people are waiting to see what happens before they make major decisions. It's also the case that there's a belief that whatever the president decides, that the economic troubles could sustain, because even if he doesn't put on the tariffs, there's going to be a significant delay in investment. Lots of people said, when I asked them, said yes, that Scott Bessent's presence as Treasury Secretary is mitigating the impact of the uncertainty over tariffs, because there is confidence in the Secretary of the Treasury that he's not going to let there be a recession or major global disruption because of the tariffs. So let me show you a few things on this topic, and then we're going to bring our guests in. First, number 5, please. Donald Trump talking about tariffs today.
Globalists won't love this because this brings jobs back to America. So if they're coming back to America, maybe you'll lose some in other parts of the world. But the other parts of the world have done very well, and they'll continue to do very well. But I think the United States is going to be doing record business. We'll bring a lot of those 90,000 factories that have been lost over the last number of years. It's hard to believe. 90,000, think of what 90,000 is. 90,000 plants and factories are gone. We're going to bring back many of those plants and factories.
All right. So the markets today, 13, please. The markets were actually up today. Our market report brought to you by our friends at the Bahnsen Group, sponsor of this program. You can see the market's up, Dow up, S&P up, NASDAQ up. That's contrast to a lot of the week when they were down. But the markets are going to market. And I think that it's clear that people are not panicked yet. But as I said, the uncertainty is something that people are commenting to me on. Today at the White House, one of the areas of the economy that the president is determined to have thrive more than it did under his predecessor is crypto. And there was a crypto summit. Here is number 11, President Trump talking about his record on crypto versus the man I like to call his predecessor.
Regulators strong-arm banks. I mean, they really did. They strong-arm banks into closing the accounts of crypto businesses and entrepreneurs, effectively blocking some money transfers to and from exchanges, and they weaponized government against the entire industry. But I know that feeling also. Maybe better than you do. All of that will soon be over, and we are ending Operation Choke Point 2.0.
So whatever you think of crypto and of the administration's plans, is clearly a difference. There's a more crypto Congress than there was last year, a more crypto president. Monday on this program, a great guest who you will want to hear explain all this. Paul Grewal is the chief legal officer of Coinbase, and he's going to join us on Monday to talk about lots of stuff related to this industry, but most specifically what he sees is different now under this administration as in the previous one, and what the year is likely to look like in crypto. So join us Monday, 6 Eastern time, and you'll hear somebody he's a great talker. He's a great explainer of this industry. Probably some of you find crypto a little confusing, and some of you know all about it. Either way, you're going to enjoy him and learn from him. So come on Monday. All right. Lastly, before we bring our guests in, Um, uh, there's a there's how would I describe it? There's a strong belief amongst the Democrats that I talked to today, and when I say talk to, text, email, and voice, that although most of them did not love this week, that they see enough trouble ahead for Donald Trump, trouble in dealing with reconciliation and passing a budget and avoiding a shutdown, trouble with some of the foreign international issues like tariffs, like Russia, and trouble in terms of the tension in the administration over Doge and their planned re-emphasis on the firing, particularly of veterans, and of doing what they were supposed to do around the president's speech on Tuesday, which is making the case about the real lives of real people and the impact that the cuts are going to have. So compared to this morning, when I was mostly hearing Democrats being upset, I'm now hearing some Democrats feeling a little bit more upbeat, like they got some place to go, and next week is a fresh start. So joining us now to talk about all of this and more, two great guests: Brian Wolf, a Democrat who's worked for one very tough person, Nancy Pelosi, and one wimpy person, Rahm Emanuel. That's how I see it. And Mercedes Schlapp, who's worked for, amongst other people, George W. Bush and Donald Trump. Two men who couldn't be more alike.
That's funny. That's
Yeah.
funny, Mark.
Yeah. I like them both. I'll say I like them both. And I'd love to go someplace with the five of us. Brian, do you know President Bush or Donald Trump at all?
Well, I know President Bush very well. One of my actually favorite all-time presidents.
Yeah, mine too.
I was a presidential leadership scholar, and he's an amazing leader. I wish that his voice amongst, and I'm sure you hear this, Mark, and Mercedes too, that I wish there were a little bit more vocal amongst the former presidents out there.
Yeah.
For what's going on today. I think that'd be really important. But I also understand the respect, the respect that they give leaders going forward. So
Yeah, Brian, you know what President Bush says all the time is it would only help Trump. That if he spoke out, it would only help Trump. And I don't know how much of that's
I
an
actually don't
excuse.
think anyone will listen to George W. Bush anymore. And I think it's better for him to spend his time
painting.
watercoloring. He's done a really beautiful job with his oils and his paintings.
Yes.
I think that's where he should stay. I think that's his lane. Especially for a president who literally led us into a massive war in the Middle East and in Iraq. And it was a bit disastrous, in my opinion. And that's coming from a Republican.
Yeah, who worked for George Bush, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Brian, have you met Donald Trump?
I have not.
Okay. Mercedes, you spent a lot of time with Rahm or Nancy Pelosi?
No, I have not. But I do want to say that Tulsi Gabbard, when she was still a Democrat, I was in the Fox News green room with her. And I remember asking her, I said, have you ever met Donald Trump? And she said, no, I have not. And I said, I really think you should meet him because I really think you two would get along. And so I'm going to say that, maybe I should take a little bit of credit for this relationship that was built.
But did you actually connect them or just plant the seed?
No, I planted the seed, but then it was Matt who brought Tulsi Gabbard to CPAC when she left the Democrat Party, when they pretty much called her a bunch of horrific names. And then she spoke at CPAC, and both Matt and her knew that they were going to get criticized for this connection. And but she went forward, and then look at where we are today.
And Mercedes, just to be clear, although you don't want George W. Bush apparently on the national town square issuing proclamations on policy and the party, you do think he's a heck of a nice guy, right?
I actually really do love the Bush family. I had the honor of working with Barbara Bush on her literacy programs. So, and I know Dora Bush well, and obviously Jeb Bush from Florida, which I grew up in Florida. So yeah, no, I think the Bush family is a lovely family. I just think he made several mistakes on the foreign policy front.
I have to say, not counting things related to my family, the highlight of my year remains when George W. Bush thumped Obama on the chest when he walked into the funeral. That thing's just, love that thing. All right. If you want to get in the conversation, please raise your hand. If you're watching on the two-way platform, if you're watching on YouTube or X, don't raise your hand and don't put smack in the chat. Show the presumption of grace to all. And if somebody says something you don't agree with here tonight, use it as a learning opportunity, not a chance to send me an email saying you'll never watch two-way again because Mercedes or Brian said something you disagreed with. That's not the point of what. It's not the point of what we're doing. All right, I want to talk to you guys about the topics that I ran through. Ukraine, Mercedes.
Yeah.
Does President Trump's strategy of good copying and bad copying on both sides, does that seem improvised to you, or do you think there's a method here to get what he wants?
The way I know President Trump functions is he'll bring his different experts in the room, Mike Waltz, Marco Rubio, obviously, Pete Hegseth, and the national security team and they'll start going back and forth on basically different options. And I think that what I think they're discovering pretty quickly is that I think that there's a little appetite, quite frankly, for peace coming from either Ukraine or Russia. We saw President Vladimir Zelensky say the other day that he thinks peace is very, very far away. And then you have this intense Russian assault on the Ukrainian energy facilities. So what I thought at first started as a strong beginning for conversations with Russia on the one side, now we're leading to the negotiations or conversations with the Ukrainian counterparts. It's going to happen between the Trump team and Ukraine in Saudi Arabia. I think this is getting complicated. This is getting messy. And so it's not just going to be a clean cut, let's get to a peace deal, at least not for now. I think that Trump is applying the pressure on Russia through these tough sanctions, which I think is much needed. But I do think that Zelensky is leaning more on the European leaders, trying to see if they can salvage him a bit. But I don't think that's going to be enough for Zelensky to get through this. So look, this is getting messy. It's getting complicated, and I don't think it's going to be a quick answer as I think many anticipated.
Brian, do you have confidence in President Trump to negotiate a good deal for the world?
Well, I would say I would agree with something that Mercedes said, that I do think that there was some rhyme and reason, maybe rare for Trump right now. People don't really have a lot of confidence with regard to sanctions or tariffs and what do they mean? Are they toothless? Are they, he seems to use them as a tool and then backs off and, does this back and forth. Maybe the sanctions on Russia with regards to oil and gas, are much heavier for the country to deal with than usual. So I think that going forward, I think he's just going to have a little bit of a hard time. I think that he was right in saying that Ukraine and sort of this latest barrage of Russian invasion on energy infrastructure, particularly, that has been a little bit, by the way, offsides. I work in the energy industry. It's been a little bit offsides for both countries. Like, don't be messing with nuclear facilities, energy infrastructure. That's kind of been offsides. And that, I think, was Russia actually showing some major aggression before they pull back and actually negotiate. I just don't see there a negotiation with Russia that Ukraine's going to accept. It's going to be a very hardline deal, but everyone knows what Russia wants, and it just really depends on how much President Trump really wants to give it to them.
Yeah, Brian, I'll stick with you on the second topic, which is, if you were advising the Democrats now, how should they talk about Doge? How should they talk about the project, the Musk-led project? Where should their focus be?
Well, I think there's a lot of fits and starts with Doge, right? I mean, I think that Elon Musk has gotten out there and there's been some overreach, and we all read about the pullbacks, right? The unintended consequences of what they do, and then all of a sudden realize it was a huge mistake. That's where, by the way, the members of Congress are getting sideways with knowing about these things that are happening in their states. I was up on the Hill this week in the House and Senate and hearing members talk about what's going on with facilities in their districts and states. I can tell you is a huge effect. That has bled over to the cabinet, as you mentioned earlier. I think that we saw that coming. So I think there's going to be a natural pullback. I don't think Elon Musk is going to tuck tail and run because of it. I think he's going to continue forward and try to work with the cabinet on what he's trying to accomplish. Look, I think I don't think Democrats really, people keep saying like Rahm Emanuel or Nancy Pelosi or Hakeem Jeffries or any of these other people that need to get out there and be able to say anything. I don't think there's much to be said right now. I think just let the show how it happened as the way it is, and you can point to all the mistakes along the way. That's just what you're going to get with cutting a government our size. On the other hand, I would say, and Mark, I will go back to something that you did on the show a couple of weeks ago. There was an article in the New York Times, and actually one of your listeners today that's on here brought it up in the chat. Actually, they brought up the member in the chat. But Ro Khanna wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. And the issue is Democrats cannot protect these institutions as they are, right? They are fundamentally flawed government institutions that have a lot of waste associated with them. Many of those points of waste have always been there or have been put there by what we call and existed over and came back to the Congress. Remember when pork was a big thing? Then it came back to the Congress as pork again. And all of these special projects that exist within there that seem quite odd that President Trump was pointing out during that joint Congress address. It's very impactful for the American people to hear about that waste when they're struggling day to day with kitchen table issues and inflationary issues in their households. So say what you want to say, but there's a lot to be said for managing these institutions better going forward. And so I think that's why Democrats really are stepping back and letting the mistakes be made. For instance, with regards to the cut at the VA, that's going to permeate throughout the country, right? I mean, you increase that because you wanted to give veterans more rights, more ability to work, more ability to have services. There's going to be things like that are unintended as far as the reach that are going to be quite damaging to the administration.
Yeah.
And, we're going to go into this, and I know it's a little bit soon to talk about it, but all of this is leading up to what will be the lashback in the midterms. I'm a political guy. That's what I'm going to be looking for. That's what they're looking for, is just let them stumble over themselves into this, because you can't get all of that right. And cutting the government, Doge is not going to get all that right all the time, but there's going to be some of it that's going to be right. So that's my point. Some, not all, though.
Okay. Mercedes, I'm going to tee up you on Doge by quoting two from George W. Bush. One is he say, "It ain't bragging if you can do it." And he said, "Some people say I swagger. In Texas, we call that walking." Those are two of my favorite. And those go to my point, which is there's so much confidence amongst your friends in the Trump administration. They're just like everything. They just kind of slough off and say, "We got this." The left is so divided. The media is discombobulated. I don't hear a lot of weakness from the White House on Doge. I do hear, as was the New York Times reported, I do hear from cabinet secretaries and their aides that they feel like Sean Duffy's worried, like, don't make me file air traffic controllers because we need some air traffic controllers. So is there any degree to which you think it would be wise for them substantively, politically, to slow this down in a material way?
Well, first of all, I think that you look at the polls and it's very clear that the majority of Americans agree with these Doge cuts.
Absolutely.
Like they're definitely popular. And to Brian's point, it's why the president did the laundry list at his address to the joint session of Congress. It was his ability to talk about the transgender experiments that they're having on mice and the fact that they're doing sex changes in Guatemala and Americans are paying for it. And Americans aren't going to put up with that. In the process, why it hasn't, this is when you're getting this incredibly brilliant tech guy, Elon Musk. He wants to move as swiftly as possible to make the cuts. And sometimes with it, there's going to be mistakes and there's going to be errors. And they've had to go back a little bit to fix some of these mistakes. And I think with the cabinet secretaries in place now, remember, they had to go through their confirmation hearings. It took a while to get them settled in. You know, the first day on the job, you had Sean Duffy, the Secretary of Transportation, having to deal with a tragic plane crash here in the Washington, D.C. area. And in essence, like, they're now being able to get into the job. They've not even been, some of these people have not even been in the job for a month. I think Pam Bondi, it was like her month anniversary this week, to say, wait a second, hold off. I got to make these decisions. Everyone needs to step away. You know, and I do think, like, for example, eliminating what they did with USAID, Marco's going to have to figure out, Marco Rubio, what parts he's going to put together. So they've worked on, well, if there's an urgent need to get something done in terms of foreign aid, he has to provide a waiver. So this is a bit of a cleanup process in this DOGE process, right? And the cabinet members are going to want to have the final say, I believe, in what cuts are going to make to their departments. With that being said, I think, I think that the best example is when you look at the fact that it was Bill Clinton and Al Gore that moved forward with over 400,000 federal employees that were laid off during that time. And the mere fact is they were able to balance the budget. And I think that there is this sense and this urgency coming from the Republican side that we can't go into further debt. We can't have this wasteful spending. We need to find the fraud. We need to find this mismanagement. The government is so bloated and it's so unsustainable that there needs to be significant changes made in the federal workforce. You know, it has been a bit messy. But when you're looking at the fact that the American people are supporting so much of these cuts, and they've looked like line item by line item and saying, are we seriously spending, millions of dollars doing a LGBTQ show in the middle of Bulgaria? Like, they're going, what the heck? Like, why are we doing this? And I can't put food on my table or, pay my bills. And so there has to be that redirection of how you're going to spend that money, or spend money in an effective way to basically help the American worker and the American families. And that has to be the priority. And that's the mandate of this president.
All right. I thank you for that. Both super interesting on that point. One more topic we're going to talk about, and then bring you in. So if you want to get in a conversation, please raise your hand, which is tariffs. I just saw a news alert that South Carolina has just executed a convicted murder by firing squad, which I did not know was still used in America. Hadn't happened in 15 years. Interesting. I'm surprised that it was not on my radar. In any event, I said at the top that a lot of business people, big and small, are concerned about the uncertainty related to tariffs. I want to show you something that David Bahnsen wrote in his newsletter in Dividend Cafe. This is number 14, please. David, many of you have already subscribed to David's newsletter. I recommend it to you. He is a sponsor of our program, and he writes a great newsletter. And on Fridays, make that full screen if you would. On Fridays, the newsletter there's a long entry, and this is what David wrote in Dividend Cafe today. If we are headed to a currency deal with China, or a border deal with Mexico, or better tariff rates with other countries, or all of the above, it will not change the fact that along the way, there's going to be an uncertainty risk premia in markets that heightens volatility. And more importantly, there will be a delay or suspension of economic activity that hampers productivity. Uncertainty is not only an issue in asset prices, it impacts economic activity. And an economy with as much mixed bag data as this one, I simply believe it is playing with fire. David writes that in the newsletter today. Again, I recommend the newsletter to you. To subscribe, it is free. Go ahead and put up number 12, please. And David writes in the newsletter exactly what I told you I've heard all day from business people. You can go to subscribe to the newsletter, go to twoway.tv/TBG, the Bahnsen Group, and subscribe. And you can also go to their website, Dividend Cafe, and read today's on tariffs. That is what I'm hearing from business folks today. So Mercedes, what people say to me is Scott Bessent isn't going to let there be a recession, and that this slowdown, if there is one in economic activity, will be wiped out by all the pro-growth policies they're pursuing on energy, on taxes, on regulation. So are you hearing concern from folks?
You know, it's interesting because Secretary Bessent said something, I believe today, where he's saying, basically saying it's going to take a while for the economy to get better. Basically, was in so many
Patient.
words.
He urged patience.
Patience was the word. Thank you. And so I do think, look, Kevin Hassett, who I was a CPAC board member, I know him very well. I worked with him in the first Trump White House. He is the National Economic Advisor, someone who I would say is not a tariff guy in any way. So you find these sort of combinations of like the Peter Navarros and the Kevin Hassetts, where it's the mixed bag of like pro-tariff, non-tariff. So I think if you start seeing the economy start to slip, I could see an adjustment coming from the White House, where the president maybe moves a little bit away from the tariff strategy. I think he kind of did more of a shock and awe right now in terms of the tariff strategy. But I do know one thing about President Trump. He's watching the NASDAQ. He's watching the Dow. He's always watching whether it's going up or going down. And in essence, I think he's used this specifically as a negotiating tactic where he has been able to get results out of it. You look at the case of Mexico, where Claudia Sheinbaum, the president, agreed to giving, thousands of security officials, putting them at the border, willing to have these conversations where they're basically agreed, look, we're not going to put tariffs on what we've agreed on in terms of USMCA. I find that they are being effective in pressuring some of these governments. And so when you even look at the tariff on China, I mean, Joe Biden basically had agreed with the tariff on China. So in essence, I think the key will be, will the businesses kind of get used to this model and adjust? Or is it going to get to a point that the tariffs are really just putting so much pressure on the markets and on the businesses that they themselves basically say, look, let's not maybe use this all the time. And we know what the president's goal is, which is free and reciprocal trade. We know that tariffs are placed on U.S. goods higher in countries like Europe, if we're exporting to Europe, or even in Brazil. And so in essence, he's putting pressure on these governments to say, you all need to, back off on your tariffs, because if not, we're going to have to, do the same. And so it is trying to renegotiate many of these trade agreements to get to the point that we start seeing these other countries also back off in terms of their tariff structure.
Brian, remind me where you grew up.
Arkansas,
south of the Mason-Dixon line, which is where Mercedes lives. And I say that because Brian disagrees strenuously with what you said, and I know that.
Could see him going like this to me.
No, but my point is, as a Southern gentleman, he only shook his head gently. They were not robust.
Gently. I saw it.
Rom would have been like this. Now, Brian, I want you to respond, but I want you to say that. Hear me say this. The reality is, business people said to me today, when the next deficit figures come out, despite Elon Musk running around with the chainsaw, the deficit's going to be higher, in part because the April tax receipts are likely to be down, in part because of the Biden administration. But the mood music of that's going to be bad for the president. So what are you hearing, Brian, about how the private sector is reacting to what's going on?
Well, there's a number of things. I just wanted to be able to point out that, we are already seeing inflation tick up again, right? Inflation was coming down. It was headed in the right direction. If you look at the figures from election day to today, very different. We're over at over a 10% correction in the market right now. You have the folks on Wall Street now that are banks that are saying, we're clearly headed in that direction of a full correction. And the tariff strategy, and Mercedes, I would say that it is a tool, right? It's a tool. But I just wanted to say that I don't think that over time it can be an ongoing tool. Because if you're like, I think he did that with regards to Mexico, and then pulled back and then went forward again after Mexico reacted and still wanted to go forward with tariffs. So I don't think that it's actually going to be a tool over time that's going to be effective. It's just exactly what the head of the Fed said today, which is the tariffs have caused nothing but uncertainty. Okay. And until there's some clarity from the administration on tariffs, then he's not going to look and see which way the entire economy is going to go.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a big statement for him to make today. He made it to the markets. The markets didn't, markets ticked up a little bit today, but they've been decimated over the past week. And and I think that what we're going to see is this, this affecting more and more everyday Americans, whether it's 401ks or what they're seeing, and what we haven't talked about it yet, but what we're seeing with regards to Medicaid or Medicare, or what might be coming down the pike with Social Security and these safety net programs. That's a huge deal, by the way, and they've been sacred in elections. So again, I think you're going to see Rahm Emanuel has been outspoken about it. I think leaders of the Democratic Party have been outspoken about it. I think we're literally more in the shock and awe of what Trump is doing, that all Democrats really have is fact checking after the fact.
Yeah.
That is one of the most ineffective, by the way. Mark, I hate it.
I agree with
It's
you.
like, it's defensive, it's ineffective. It's, if you're going to get out there and try to set the tone, get out there, but stop trying to fact check everything when it's already out there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you.
I'm nodding when Brian talks, Mark.
Yeah,
See, I'm
I know.
not shaking my head like,
Yeah.
but I think, Brian, we agree more than you think. I agree that it's like, I don't know if this tariff strategy is going to be the long-term strategy when you start seeing economic numbers come that the president doesn't like. And then I could see him shifting gear. Now, he does like using the tariff mode, but I do think that I've seen how it's just trying to move the needle forward. The question will be, will businesses kind of understand the mentality and say, okay, we can adjust accordingly, or will the president will just have to move off the tariffs? I think that will be the interesting thing to look at.
Well, actually, the bigger thing, Mercedes, would be if, for example, a big, huge win for the president would be if Russia does react to the sanctions and the tariffs, and there's some level of pullback there that is measurable. Then I think you're right. I think that's a big win for him. I think that's why he's stepping his toe into it and trying to send folks to Saudi Arabia, be the negotiator, be the peacemaker. In that, there's a lot of upside there.
Yeah, political upside and peace dividend potentially. Joe, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind, please.
Thank you. I love the show. I'm from lovely central New Jersey, right down the road from the Trump Club in Bedminster. In fact, I used to work in that area before I retired for a telecom company. Mark, I love the show.
Thank you, sir.
I think it's great, and there's so much that I would like to say. I wish you guys all the success. There's reasons I think that it's going to be difficult, only because I see so many people are just locked in to their positions, and it's really hard for people to change. I mean, we
just want all the people who aren't locked in.
Yeah, no, that's great. But I will tell you that I have friends for years, very smart, very well read, very politically astute, but you cannot have conversations. If you're on opposite sides, it's almost impossible. And
look, two-way is not just a political platform. We've got shows coming that I think are going to surprise people how far afield they are from politics. But within the politics space, we're trying to create a place where people can come to become unlocked and to not hate each other. I find it tragic how many people have lost friends in the last 10 years and family members, and there's just no reason it has to be. And I think particularly now, when so many of the cultural institutions that have supported the left are imperiled, I think there's a new opportunity for communication that will allow people to hopefully, discuss things and to respect difference of opinion. I just don't think that needs to be impossible. So we're trying to contribute to that.
Yeah, I absolutely pray that's true, and I'm telling everybody about two-way, and I wish they would join.
All right. Well, Joe, appreciate that. You want to ask a question, a policy or political
there's
question?
so much, but I'll stick. I thank you. The guests are great. I think The thing that I think about with Doge, I worked in private industry for 40 years. I worked for a major telecom company. And I mean, there was a realization early on that I'm a mercenary and that I was always looking over my shoulder concerning my job. And I think one of the reasons there's not a lot of empathy in the US for what's going on with Doge right now is that that's been the experience of most people for
Yep.
25, 30 years.
Yes, sir.
And the truth is, I learned something new. I think Mercedes said that during the Clinton administration, 400,000 federal jobs were downsized, which is great. I didn't know that. But I would say to both Republicans and Democrats, where have you been for the last 25 years?
Yeah.
Where have you been? I think people are just absolutely frustrated because their personal experiences, this is what they live every day. Personally, I've been downsized twice and had to land on my feet. And in some ways, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? I'm not recommending it, but it does keep you sharp. And I think, they're not doing a great job in terms of, the way the experience of some of these people that are on probation or new to the government. But the truth is, it's been a long time coming, and both Democrats and Republicans have neglected this job.
Joe, I'll make sure I'll let you jump in. I'll just say, as I say to many people come on the platform, Joe, you speak for tens of millions. Mercedes.
Yeah. I think, Joe, that's really such such an important comment to make, because I do think, look, I've been living in this DC area for quite some time. And there is this sense of the federal workers that their job is super duper secure. And then they get an incredible pension. Like, they'll work for 15, 20 years and they're set for life. And that's just not the case for everyday Americans. It's just not the case if you worked in corporate America or you started your own business. And so it's really hard for us to go back to the federal worker and be like, yeah, you're in a really cushy position. In some cases during COVID, they never showed up to work. Those federal office buildings, they were like 6% at capacity, which is outrageous. And it's like if COVID never left DC. And so, while there is, of course, those federal workers that are working day and night, they're doing a great job. There was those out there that you're just going, wait a second, they were literally just getting a paycheck. I would go over to these agencies and the buildings were mostly empty, number one. And number two, like, you didn't know what these people were doing. Like, there was no real accountability in some of these jobs. And it does raise the question of like, okay, we have duplicative job functions across the different agencies. That has to be cut. And you know what? In corporate America, they're laying off people left and right. They're laying off people. Why is this not happening in the federal government that's bloated, that's being paid for by the taxpayer, and that, you don't quite, and then you start looking at what they're doing and you're going, this is a waste of taxpayer dollar. And so the government is not working optimally for the people, right? And so that's why I think you've seen this sense of people saying, like, you, Joe, and others, the tens of millions saying, yeah, this makes sense. We need to cut waste. Yeah.
Brian.
And I don't want to hog the mic at all. I know, a lot of people, but that's exactly been my experience. And I will tell you that corporate America was a lot less gentle than what the Trump administration is doing.
100%. Brian.
Yeah, I agree largely with that. Like I said, from the beginning, I really don't think we can really largely protect these institutions as they are. So it is true, Clinton Gore did it. Remember, under the banner of reinventing government, which is what Gore was charged with. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement in these agencies. Absolutely, 100%. And they do become inflated over time. They did get a bad rap with getting called back to work just here recently while everybody else has been back to work. So I think that there is a lot of bad PR there for the federal workforce. So, I think there's a lot of improvement there, but I don't really think that's an issue here. I think what's an issue here is a lot of the programmatic things that are being cut, in these agencies that have huge, huge impacts on the American people and that we rely on and that Doge is being educated on daily. I mean, which is a lot of the, ebb and flow right now of what's going on, the pullback and firing of workers, and then all of a sudden realized we can't fire those workers. Mercedes brought it up with regards to air traffic controllers. I mean, there's a lot of that happening back and forth. I think it's just to be expected.
Yeah.
I don't I don't largely discredit them. They're going to make mistakes in this process. I still think it's something that we can be largely more efficient at doing, which is running our government. Um, and by the way, I really don't think Democrats out there protecting a label of big government is a winning message either on behalf of the Democrats. So I think they had to be very careful about doing this. Pay attention to the programs, bring the voices to the front that are part of those programs that are being cut and put a voice to them. That's the only thing that's going to work in some of the missteps with Doge.
Yeah, Joe, thanks for coming
Thank
and
you.
thanks for spreading the word about two-way. Greatly appreciate it. I don't want to risk keeping Mercedes past her time because she needs to leave a little bit early. So I'm just going to thank you both. I love having you both on. I love how you talked both to each other and a little bit at each other in a good way. And
Oh, in a good way.
in a good way. And I'm grateful whenever you both come on. So thank you both. I hope you have a great weekend. And
Thank you, Mark. Thank
very
you
much
all so
appreciate being
much.
part of it. Brian, thank you. What I'm going to do with our remaining little bit of time here together is rapid round. Call on folks with their hands up. I'd love to just a couple sentences, say what's on your mind. Maybe I'll respond briefly, but just give you a chance to sound off on whatever it is, a question or a comment. But again, no more than 2 or 3 sentences if you would. John, go ahead, please. Unmute.
Okay, glad to. I'm a lifelong Republican, but a non-Trump voter. I wanted to comment primarily on a discussion that you've had from time to time, and earlier this week, quite extensively one evening, on the press's failure to cover Biden's decline.
Yes, sir.
And I realize now, of course, I didn't quite at the time, that was a very serious oversight and a mistake on the media's part. I think it's very, very important to cover the pathology, so to speak, that might be affecting the decision-making capabilities of our presidents.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you for
I
that.
think
I'm sorry about that, John. Cut you off, but just again, a couple sentences. Tom, go ahead.
Hey, Mark, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to see if you have any comment on the story in the Free Press the other day about this $2 billion going to a pop-up NGO that had $100 in the bank in 2023.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw the headline. I didn't read it, so I don't feel comfortable commenting. All I can say is it doesn't surprise me if it's true, unfortunately. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right. Mike, go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. Unmute again, Mike. I apologize. I muted you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I want to talk about a couple things really quick. One is the comments earlier about Rubio and Musk dust up. I think it's more about, I think as Doge goes into these agencies, and USAID is one of them, where you'll see these, National Endowment for Democracy and these other NGOs below them receiving money. You're going to find politicians in Washington that are at the head of those boards.
Yep.
So I think that's more of what this is about. Both sides, not just the Democrats. I think it's both parties in Washington. The second thing, really quick, is just on the NIH, and Francis Collins was out there protesting today.
Yeah.
And I find it ironic that he's out there protesting, and he was the one that was trying to silence, and there's email proof of this, Jay Bhattacharya, who wrote The Great Barrington Reef and is going to be the new NIH director. So.
Okay. Yep, I saw that. Thank you, Mike. Eric, welcome in. Thanks for coming back. What's on your mind, sir? 1 or 2 sentences.
Hey, Mark. I just want to echo what you had mentioned earlier, and Peggy Noonan said. I'm a little frustrated that I feel like that I understand his constituency, but Ro Khanna's talk about the trans thing in sports, it feels like a own goal, so to speak, and we really need a robust opposition to the Republicans right now. And even though I'm sure Buck would disagree, so frustrated at that, but yes, I'd love it if we can get this thing a little closer to 50-50.
Yeah, Eric, thank you. Buck, MAGA forever. Thanks for coming, guys. Patty, go ahead, please.
Real quick, I have to say, because I haven't said it yet, how much this platform means to me. I have probably a half a dozen friends who haven't told at this point that I voted for Trump, and I know they would totally cancel me. And so this has been a haven for me. The comment I want to make that I'd love to hear more about, because I really am kind of not understanding what Europe is trying to do with Ukraine and how long they'll stick with Zelensky and what's going on there. I don't know if you have any insight into that, but I'd sure love some kind of commentary to help better understand, because I can't figure out what Europe is trying to do in their role with Zelensky.
Yeah, they're very worried about embolden Russia. They're very worried about the precedent of Putin can take land and then not have to give it back. And they feel safer if they can bring Ukraine into the economically and militarily into their orbit. They're going through a bit of an identity crisis too, right? They're trying to raise their defense budgets. They're a little resentful of the U.S. and of Trump. So I think that each of these leaders is probably have a slightly different point of view, but in the main, they just don't want to see a Putin empowered, and they differ from President Trump there, who's more of a realist about it in the classic foreign policy senses. He doesn't think there's any other alternative. I'm surprised we haven't seen any of the European leaders come out a little bit more full-throated in support of the Trump position, but I don't believe they're particularly well empowered, and I think they're going to have to fall in line. But for now, they just don't like the precedent to some extent. Patty, thank you. Really appreciate the question. Talk more about that. Reed, come on in. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind briefly, please.
Hey, Mark.
Yes, sir.
You can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hey, thank you so much. Your platform is incredible. I found you a few months before the election, and your interview with Tucker was just astounding. I was in shock listening to it, just hearing someone who seemed genuinely middle of the road. I voted for Gary Johnson when I was 18, Trump hesitantly the next time around, and then Trump pretty full-throatedly most recently. Since it's rapid fire, I guess I would just ask you, how can I best get my local municipality, which is Raleigh, North Carolina, how can I get a public golf course built? Where should I start?
Do you know where you want it to be built?
Well, Dorothea Dix Park seems like a good tract of land, but it could be anywhere.
Yeah, and who would have to sign off on it? The city council or the mayor? Or
I don't know. That's what you're the expert, sir.
I'm not an expert about Raleigh local. I think you want to figure out, go find out who your city council person is. Okay, and go visit with that person and tell them what your goal is, and say you'd like their help, but you'd like their advice about who would have to be for it to get it done. And then I'm big for grassroots. If you want to get it done, go find folks who share your point of view and figure out how you can get politicians to do what you want. Politicians will do what the voters say if the voters make it clear that they're organized and they really want it. So figure out who needs to be convinced, and then get some people to go convince them together with you. That'd be my generic advice. But I confess I don't know much about golf in Raleigh. I apologize for that.
Well, hey, come see us sometime. We have a lot of good barbecue.
You do. I like it down there. Thank you, sir, for coming in. All right. We're going to finish up here. I'm grateful to everybody for watching. We've had quite a week here. Lots of participation, very high viewership, and we're very grateful for that. Also grateful for the Bonson Group, David Bonson, sponsoring this program. Next week, we'll be back, full slate of regular shows. And then remember, if you're in New York City Tuesday night, few tickets left. If you want to come to the Olive Tree Restaurant Tuesday night, we'll be doing a live show from their new program called Table 17, which we'll hear more about next week. And as I said, Monday we'll be talking about the new economy and crypto and where we stand on that. So see you next, barring breaking news over the weekend, 9 a.m. Monday morning. Sean, Dan, and I for the morning meeting. Couldn't be more grateful for this community and for all of you making time on a Friday night. And I'll see you over the weekend or maybe Monday at 9. Have a great time.